Without a face and a name, an Egyptian was nothing. To be remembered, they needed these two signs of identity, an image and a word as their safe conduct for the journey to eternal life. But time, pride, and greed wipe away what is written. Memory crumbles into fragments. Fame carved in stone becomes sand, and what was meant to be forever disappears like ink in the dust of the desert. This is the story of a journey into the past in search of the hopes, the knowledge, and the victories of a man condemned to have neither a name nor a face. A man condemned to have never existed. For the ancient Egyptians, the word had a supreme value in the creation of reality. Everything which is named exists, and what is written exists forever. For archaeologists, each fragment of pottery, wood, or cloth is a word in the great text of reality. The challenge is finding those words one by one, reading the world through them, and tracing a path called history, which links the past to our present. In this adventure, every name we find will be a life saved from oblivion. 3,500 years ago, a woman, Hatshepsut, broke with rules and traditions to have herself crowned king of Upper and Lower Egypt. The Queen King built her monumental mansion of millions of years at Deir el-Bahari to immortalize her deeds and her links with Amun-Ra, the king of the gods. A year after her coronation, Hatshepsut sent a trading expedition to the land of Punt in the Horn of Africa. The ships returned to Thebes laden with gold, incense, myrrh, elephant tusks, leopard skins, giraffe tails, monkeys. And the royal scribe and overseer of the treasury added it all to the inventory. What is written exists. What is carved in stone lives on. The royal scribe had himself depicted in the temple of Hatshepsut behind the workers heaping up incense. His presence in the scene is unusual and somewhat indecorous. Later on, his figure and his name would be deleted from the scene. Today, they can only be seen in a raking light. Who was that person? And why was he condemned to be forgotten, the true death of the dead? Let my memory remain on earth, and my bar live on before the Lord of eternity. The restitution of the name of Djehuty begins in Madrid in November 2000. José Manuel Galán, professor at the Spanish National Research Council, is gathering information about tombs which had been found but not yet excavated. Galán arrives in Luxor with a list of 10 tombs from the early 15th century BCE, when Egypt was laying the foundations of its empire at the start of the 18th dynasty. There he talks to the head of the Antiquities Service on the West Bank and visits the tomb of Djehuty for the first time. This was the start of the Djehuty project. We had a name. We still needed the face. The tomb is at the foot of the Draabu El Naga hill facing Luxor and next to a modern village. When the first dig starts in January 2002, the site is covered in earth, stones, rubble, and rubbish. 5 years later, the Egyptian authorities decide to rehouse the villagers in a new neighborhood, and their houses are demolished. This is an extraordinary turn of events for the Djehuty project, as it means they can excavate part of the necropolis which had been hidden under the houses. The new area is called Sector 10, and it contributes more names and more faces to this story. Djehuty was overseer of the treasury and overseer of the workers under the reign of Hatshepsut, one of the few women to rule as a pharaoh in ancient Egypt around the year 1470 BCE. As overseer of the treasury, he was responsible for collecting taxes and administering the foreign wealth which poured into the capital city, Thebes. And as overseer of the workers, he sent the metal he collected to the temples to decorate the most significant elements, such as doors and obelisks. And handling the metals, collecting them on the one hand and sending them to the temples on the other. A certain percentage probably stayed with him, which would enable him to build the tomb behind me, his funerary monument, his house for eternity.
Cuando entré por primera vez en la tumba de Djehuty en noviembre del año 2000,
when I entered Djehuty's tomb for the first time in November 2000, the first thing I noticed, and what most drew me, was the fact that his funerary monument was covered in writing, from the facade to as far as we could see inside. There are inscriptions and scenes in low relief which talk about his life, his family, the work he did as an administrator for the crown, but also about his religious beliefs, the burial rituals he wanted carried out after he died. So his monument became an open history book, his individual history, and also the history of an era, and that was what most interested me. Djehuty is a lover of reading and writing. He presents himself as a great scribe, and what I was looking for was texts, information about society in ancient Egypt. At that time, the empire was beginning to take shape, at the start of the 15th century BCE. The road to Djehuty was marked out in words, words written on linen, wood and plaster, words carved in stone, like the ones which you can still read in one of the obelisks of the temple of Karnak. At the bottom, the inscription tells us how and why the obelisk was made. The inscription begins, "She," meaning Queen Hatshepsut, has built this monument, the obelisk, for her father, Amun-Ra, Lord of the Thrones, Lord of the Two Lands, Lord of Karnak. And it notes that the two obelisks were made with hard granite from the south, referring to the granite quarries at Aswan, and the cap has been clad with a natural gold and silver alloy, electrum. This is a very important reference for us, because in his biography on the facade, Djehuty talks about exactly this, that as the overseer of the treasury and overseer of the craftsmen, among many other things, he had the obelisk at Hatshepsut at Karnak plated with electrum. In other words, we have the same information from two sources, from the person in charge of getting it done, Djehuty, and from the point of view of Queen Hatshepsut. Every morning the sun rises between the two obelisks flanking the entrance to the temple of Karnak. Every evening it sets behind Abu el-Naga, on the opposite bank of the Nile. It's the perfect hill to be buried on. Abu el-Naga was already being used as a necropolis around the year 2000 BCE. 400 years later, the kings of the 17th dynasty were buried there with their families and courtiers. It had become a noble burial site. When Djehuty was looking for the place to build his house for eternity around 1470 BCE, he wanted to be facing Karnak, and at the same time find a place among the tombs of the highest rank of society. Djehuty made the entrance courtyard to his tomb longer than usual, extending the side walls carved into the rock with thick mud brick walls. the wall on the left changes direction abruptly, and this very noticeable swerve is to avoid a small mud brick building. The swerve and the mud brick building tell us that this structure was here before Djehuty, and even though it is very simple, it was important enough for him to decide not to demolish it, but to respect it and build around it, which was not what the aesthetics of the time demanded. Removing tons of sand without damaging a single letter and being able to read the great text of a buried world needs a lot of hands. Archaeologists, epigraphists, restorers, geologists, architects, photographers, laborers, and their foremen. This is a Spanish project which brings together the work and experience of a great international team. The Rais Ali Farouk is the foreman of the Djehuty project. He was born in the city of Djehuty, which is well known for its archaeological site foremen, or Rais, and he organizes and supervises 100 workers. The building which Djehuty made space for when he built his tomb is a small chapel for offerings made of mud bricks. Angie, an archaeologist and Egyptologist, is in charge of excavating its interior. There she discovers a set of wooden figurines representing mummies, which the ancient Egyptians called shabti. Some were painted white, and the name of the deceased was written on them in black ink with a brush. After painting, they were wrapped in linen bandages and put in little coffins. The name on 3 of the shabtis and on a linen cloth is Ahmose Sapair. We know that the Drabu and Naga Hill was the burial site of the kings, the royal family, and the elite of the 17th dynasty. Some of the tombs have been identified, but many more still remain unlocated. For example, the tomb of a prince called Ahmose Sapair, who died very young, at just 5 years old, and even though he never became king and he died so young, he became a saint of the necropolis, and for more than 500 years the Egyptians brought him offerings and made inscriptions to him. As I say, his tomb has never been found, although we know it's on Drabu and Naga. During the 17th dynasty, around the year 1600 BCE, even the royal family's burial places were simple. A small chapel, usually of mud brick, for making offerings at the end of the funeral and on the Day of the Dead. Opposite, a shaft around 6 meters deep, big enough for a coffin to be lowered into it in a horizontal position. The shaft would end in 1 or 2 burial chambers where the coffin and the grave goods would be deposited. The chamber was closed off with mud brick and the shaft would be filled in with earth and stone. Going down into a burial shaft inspires mixed emotions. There is the desire to discover and to learn, alongside the unnerving feeling that you are invading someone else's space, which was designed for eternity. Ibrahim has been with the team for more than 10 years, and he has excavated 6 burial shafts. A tomb is a home for life after death, and as such, it contains or recreates things from everyday life. Sometimes past lives become real in these small everyday objects. Although it has been looted in ancient times, at the bottom of the shaft associated with the mud brick chapel and the Ahmose Sapair shabits and linens, significant pieces are found, such as this bronze razor, and some as delicate as a pretty carved wooden comb, or a necklace of plant fibers with gilded highlights. Personal objects which bring us into direct contact with what really lies at the heart of history. real flesh and blood people. Next to the chapel for offerings, a large pottery deposit is uncovered with around 2,000 vessels. This has to be related with a nearby tomb of somebody important. Elena is one of the ceremologists studying this pottery.
When we find a ceramic deposit, the first thing we do is spread it all out on haziyas, which are Egyptian reed mats, so we get an overall view. We try to reconstruct as many pieces as possible, and once we have the pieces, we take photographs to document them. But sometimes, photography is not enough, and then we have to make drawings, carefully marking the type of edge, the type of base, whether there is a handle, any decoration, and all this information tells us the period of the piece we're working on.
The excavation of Sector 10 continues, and another burial shaft is discovered. This brings to light the portrait and the name of another little-known prince of the time, Thutmose. They are carved on the base of a small limestone obelisk, which must have once marked the entrance to the chapel. Pia, one of the restorers on the team, is also in charge of producing artistic epigraphic drawings. Most of the tombs have been looted, but if the looting took place in ancient times, there is a chance of finding something which will give us some clues about the owner of the tomb. The modest grave goods which the treasure hunters left behind are like random words in the text describing a different kind of treasure, culture, and life. At the bottom of this shaft, we find that the tomb of Thutmose is no exception. The robbers broke through a wall of the burial chamber to reach the tomb of another illustrious personage of the period, Ahotep, the dignitary and spokesman of Nekhen. The looters left a mess, but again we make unique discoveries which are documented in minute detail before being removed, so their context can be considered while studying them. A palm leaf sandal to be used by the deceased in the next life, and a clay sarcophagus containing a small shabti. The shabtis of Ahotep were molded in clay and painted to look like his mummy. The name was written on their legs, as usual in coffins of the period. They were each placed in their inscribed sarcophagi, also made of clay. One of the figurines was wrapped in 9 linen bandages like a real mummy, and that's how we found it. Pito, the excavation team's photographer, using ultraviolet light, discovers that the name and titles of Ahotep were written on all the bandages. Meanwhile, in the excavation area supervised by Jose Miguel, with the help of Yuma, one of the biggest personalities working on the project, a rather unusual burial is found in the same area as the ceramic deposit. It is a child's coffin, which already means the find is important, because despite the high infant mortality of the ancient world, almost all the tombs found are of adults. Its position is also surprising. The small wooden coffin, human-shaped and painted white, was set directly on the ground and deliberately placed on its side, with stones to keep it steady. Inside is the mummy of a child, aged about 5, the same age at which the venerated Ahmose Sapair is thought to have died. And it is from the same period as him, but we cannot be sure of his identity, because the word is not there. There are no texts or any clues other than these coincidences. The sons of wealthy families entered the scribe schools very young. Being able to read and write ensured they would be high-ranking officials and made it easier for them to join the elite. Young scribes learned how to write with a brush on a stuccoed wooden panel, copying model text and figures laid out on a red grid. These must have been Djehuty's first lessons at school, on his way to becoming a royal scribe. The so-called apprentice board found in pieces at the entrance to his tomb seems to confirm it. The relief carvings in Djehuty's tomb show what the funeral rites of the elite must have been like at the start of the 15th century BCE.
Nos encontramos en el lateral de la fachada de la tumba de Djehuty. Estoy sentado en
This is the side wall of the tomb of Djehuty. I'm sitting on a stone bench which is part of the wall. And behind me, to my right, there is a series of scenes which could be related to the beautiful feast of the valley, which was an ancient Egyptian celebration of the dead. Basically, this festival involved a procession, beginning at the temple of Karnak and stopping at certain places, such as the Red Chapel of Hatshepsut, crossing the river to the Theban necropolis, where we are now, on Drabu el Naga, where Djehuty's tomb is, and then taking a processional way to end at Dair el Behari. Egyptian families would gather at the necropolis on that day at the graves of their relatives and clean them. They would bring food and drink and make music. The figure of Djehuty shown here in front of the offering table where all the gifts are laid during the beautiful feast of the valley, as you can see, has suffered the attacks of damnatio memoriae, the condemnation of memory. The face is most damaged around the nose, the mouth and the eyes, the sense organs. In front are his name and his title. The title is still there, Overseer of the Treasury, and here's a gap where Djehuty's name should be, which, as you can see, did not survive the destruction of the damnatio memoriae. Curro, Egyptologist and epigraphist, studies the inscriptions of the objects discovered. Some of the most important objects, because there are so many and for the information they give us, are the so-called funerary cones. These are clay objects, usually shaped into cones or prisms, where the flat side is designed to carry the imprint of a seal, which briefly states the titles and names of the deceased, the owner of the tomb. Djehuty is the overseer of the House of Silver, the treasury, and overseer of the works of the king. Then comes his name, Djehuty, and a funerary epithet. True a voice that is someone who has overcome death. Let my good name be before the people, before those who come when years have passed, and let them pray to me each time with the favor of the gods of the city. After the discovery of the child's coffin laid directly on the ground, the team continued to excavate the area. Maybe there'll be more burials like this one. The find of a second coffin confirms their expectations, and a wave of excitement sweeps over the whole team. Angie coordinates the work. The coffin is not as well preserved. The feet are affected by damp, and it has to be handled very carefully. Finally, it is ready to be moved and studied. The restorers, Pierre and Nieves, have the job of opening the coffin. As before, it contains a child, although this one is slightly older. The shroud wrapped around the body is badly damaged, and step by step they extract and order bones, the remains of bandages, bits of wood. Everything can provide information. Roxy, Salima and Joel are physical anthropologists and paleopathologists assigned to study the human remains.
See that he's an 11-year-old. He's got his second molars just about coming into eruption, but there's no wear yet on them, so he's an 11-year-old. He still has his deciduous or baby teeth for the premolar, where the premolars and canines would be, but these are all his adult teeth here.
Djehuty's tomb is gradually revealing its secrets. In the first campaign in February 2002, the innermost chamber was full of earth and stones, almost to the ceiling. Five campaigns were needed to fix the problem of rubble falling through two holes which had appeared in the roof in ancient times. Then the excavation of the interior could begin. Once the last chamber has been cleared, the morning sun once again shines through the passage and lights up the group of statues at the end, recalling the divine triad of a temple. Time and the constant reuse of the funerary building have left their mark. Now the restorers can reconstruct texts and reliefs, trying to revive their original splendor, but without hiding the scars, which are also history. 3 Spanish restorers and 3 Egyptians are involved in undoing the work of time, combining the techniques of cleaning, stabilization, consolidation, and reconstruction. The holes made in the roof in ancient times had let water in, and it had pooled in some areas, leaving a crust of mud on the walls. Nieves, in charge of restoring the walls inside Djehuty's tomb, uses an ultrasonic cutter to remove the layer of mud. And she finds that history as well as water had flowed through the tomb, leaving new words in the story. Under the fine layer of mud are dozens of red graffiti in Demotic script. These are texts written 1,300 years after Djehuty by priests who made use of some of the tombs in the area to deposit thousands of animal mummies, mainly birds such as ibis and hawks. The Egyptologists specializing in Demotic script, Richard and Tina, copy, translate, and study the graffiti.
Demotic graffiti all relate to the burial of the ibis and the falcon mummies which were found in these tombs here. These texts were written in the 2nd century BCE. They all relate to the priests who were working here. In some of the cases you can see the titles of the priests, Djehuty here. Sometimes they give you also the date. In this case it's year 10.
But where are the animal mummies? The tombs of Draabu el Naga were built abutting each other, both horizontally and vertically. They are often separated by just half a meter of rock. It would be easy enough to punch holes through and connect them, making the inside of the hill into a kind of catacomb. The tomb of Heri, near Djehuty's, was built around 50 years earlier, and also has red graffiti and Demotic script on its walls. At the end of the innermost chamber there is a shaft. An intense smell of mummy, a mixture of resins and unguents, rises from its dark depths. 7 meters down, there are 2 burial chambers which had been reused to handle and deposit hundreds of mummified birds. Cisco, a specialist in Greco-Roman Egypt, Salima, an animal mummy specialist, and Megan, a zoo archaeologist, investigate the burial chambers. From the Saidi period on, during the first Persian domination of Egypt, and then under the Greeks, there was a boom in sacred animal cults. And this is related to the burial of these animal mummies.
So we had 2 different chambers, and in the south chamber it was filled with burnt bones, and they were really highly fired. And also right at the bottom there were chunks of mummified ibises and other birds. Now this chamber, though, almost to the roof, is filled with well over 1,000, maybe 2,000-3,000 ibis mummies. There are 2 main kinds of mummies we have here. The first kind is actual ibises that have been dipped into boiling resins and oils and then wrapped up and then given as offerings. But the second kind are just burnt bones, very much like the burnt bones we are finding in the southern chamber. But the catacomb doesn't just contain ibises. We have vultures, hawks, falcons, kestrels, and also some lizards. So we have a variety of animals, and it's not just one kind. But whatever it was, where all these birds were dedicated to both Ibis, Thoth as well as Horus. So you have the sun and the moon and the entire cycle of life being encapsulated in these animal mummies.
Outside, the excavation continues. 3 meters below the floors of the modern houses that had been built in the area not long before, 17th dynasty burials are still being found after being hidden for 3,000 years. Next to the place where the second child's coffin was found, a few days later the top of a new burial shaft is found, and Angie and Yuma start excavating it. The earth is more compact and damper than in other shafts, which could mean it is intact, which would really be exceptional. The area certainly has great potential. The team's expectations and enthusiasm are increasing, and this spreads to the workmen who take every opportunity to express their cheerful mood. Just a few meters from the mud brick chapel and the Ahmose shaft, Ibrahim and Saglab are excavating another shaft. The earth is very loose, indicating that it must have been looted in ancient times between 1000 and 600 BCE. Ancient grave robbers were mainly looking for gold, bronze, and semi-precious stones, and often left other remains which can now tell us a great deal about the person buried there. They are simple everyday objects such as a basket, a little pot of coal and its applicator for painting the eyes, an ink pot. Each piece is documented, added to the inventory, studied, stored, and entered in the site database. In each campaign, the set of pieces found becomes the provisional vocabulary of the great text, which is gradually being rewritten.
Los tejidos tenían
Textiles had many uses in Egypt, not just making clothes and household linens. You could also pay workers' salaries with them. And because they were expensive, they were reused for a long time. And we find some pieces which are mended or darned. Cloth was also reused to make strips or pieces for the mummification process, to wrap the mummies, and even to stuff the cavities after removing the person's internal organs, so the body would keep its shape.
Of course, everything found stays in Egypt in the storage facilities of the Antiquities Service. Very few pieces are chosen to be taken across the Nile and exhibited in the Luxor Museum. There are now 5 sets of objects from the Djehuty project in its display cases. The apprentice's board, a textile dated to the 2nd year of the reign of Amenhotep II, delicate bouquets of flowers offered at a tomb 3,000 years ago, the gold earrings found at the entrance to Djehuty's burial chamber, and the red coffin of Iker, a Nubian who lived 4,000 years ago and was buried with his clubs, bows and arrows. If archaeology is a bridge connecting the past and the future, conservation is just as important as excavation. The architects Carlos, Joan and Nacho work hard to ensure that one day the tombs of Djehuty and Eri can be opened to the public. They have reinforced the ceiling and installed LEDs to light the reliefs on the walls.
En las escenas de banquetes que se representan en las paredes de su monumento,
in the banqueting scenes on the walls of the tomb and in the group of sculptures behind me, Djehuty is always depicted with his father and mother. The key question this brings up is, if Djehuty did not have a wife and children, who was in charge of arranging his funeral? Who would make sure his coffin was placed in his burial chamber? Djehuty took his role as an overseer of works to extremes and has himself depicted in his funerary monument supervising his own funeral. This wall shows what would be the ideal funeral for an important figure in the reign of Queen Hatshepsut in the early 15th century BCE. And indeed, this is the funeral that Djehuty wanted to be held in his memory, including, for example, the decapitation and sacrifice of cattle, which will later be cooked, and their heads thrown in a fiery shaft. This decoration, which depicts Djehuty's funeral, is directly connected with the shaft just underneath it, which is the true tomb of Djehuty. The design of Djehuty's tomb is unusual. The descent to the burial chamber, about 12 meters down, is a spiral, interrupted only by an antechamber. Lucia goes down every day to study the most astonishing find in this tomb. Neither the scribe's mummy nor his coffin is there. They have probably been stolen, torn apart and burnt by the ancient grave robbers. But his spirit is there. The spirit of the scribe who loved reading and writing is alive and present for what would be the biggest discovery of José Manuel Galán and his team after years of excavation. Djehuty's burial chamber is completely covered in writing from top to bottom. 41 chapters of the Book of Coming Forth by Day, better known as the Book of the Dead, make the walls and ceiling speak.
The Book of the Dead was a set of funerary texts which were intended to help the deceased cross the threshold of death and have the best possible afterlife.
Words spoken by the overseer of the king's treasury, Djehuty. O mother, O Nut, stretch over me and place me among the imperishable stars. For I shall not die. Raise me up. I am thy son. Let me not languish. And protect me from my enemies.
Djehuty's Book of the Dead is important because it is one of the earliest known versions of this set of funerary texts, and also one of the most complete. Around this time, chapters would be written on shrouds, which only had room for shorter texts, and in Djehuty's tomb there are more than 30 chapters. These are the fragments we found in Djehuty's burial chamber during the excavation. They are from the ceiling which fell in and 2 walls which were knocked down to enlarge the chamber. About 700 fragments were recovered, and what we are trying to do is put them back together and reconstruct the original decoration of the walls, like a giant jigsaw puzzle.
The process continues, reconstructing the text to scale, using image treatment programs and transcribing it to standard hieroglyphics. The final goal is the scientific publication of Djehuty's Book of the Dead. Ibrahim has reached the bottom of the nameless prince's burial shaft and calls the Mudir back to show him something unexpected. He has discovered a second chamber with a hole in the wall. We certainly have enough work for this campaign and next year's because, my goodness. The excavation of Sector 10 is still full of surprises. Now all the expectation is focused on the bottom of the shaft that Angie and Yuma are excavating.
This shaft, I know, me now, it's a job for me. I know if you can, some people work in this place or not. This place from the shaft, not people worked before. Inshallah, down and good. I hope we have good an object, a nice place.
The whole project team seems to be holding their breath. They are about to enter a place that has not been visited for more than 3,000 years. Nobody knows what it'll look like or what will be inside. But there's no greater incentive for an archaeologist than the mystery of time standing still in an untouched space. The first visual inspection is even better than hoped.
Well, we can see a coffin in the center of the chamber. It seems not to have been touched. It's intact. The coffin is closed. We can see it still has some of the pegs used to join the planks. Although there is quite a lot of rubble, although not up to the top, and the coffin is dirty, it's covered in dust, we can see that it is the Rishi type, which is an anthropomorphic polychrome coffin, and the decoration consists of a series of feathers covering the body.
سيد يا سيد مية مية كم خشب ورا عندك؟ كم خشب قد ايه؟ 10 10؟ اديني 5 سم هوبا بس ماشي على الله زد اللبن اهو
فرط المنبحري المنبحري فرط نزل الحيط فخاف شباب فخاف لابس الحيط
تحت الشيخ هنا
ماشي تعال هنا خذوا عليك سكه او على العلي يا نطلع لي هنا ما تخافش حنطلع لك بس انت بتشيل كان بالعرض بقول تعال تعال يا معادي
The coffin is in very good condition. We have a name, Neb, written on the lid, and a face with yellowed skin and wide open eyes. Covered in feathers, Neb is beginning a new stage of his path to immortality. A favor granted by the king and also by Osiris, lord of Abydos, consisting of an invocation of offerings of bread and beer, beef and fowl, linen and alabaster, unguents and incense, all kinds of offerings and provisions, and all other pure things on which a god may live, for the car of the Osiris, Neb. In the search for Djehuty over 13 years of excavations in Luxor, José Manuel Galán and his team have encountered other illustrious personages. His neighbors Ere, Baki, and Ai, the child Ahmose Sapair, Prince Interhofmose, Ahotep, the spokesman of Nehen, and now Neb, who lived 3,600 years ago. It's an exceptional find. Hardly any intact burials are known from this period. And this is the first coffin with these characteristics to be found in over 100 years. Its counterparts, numbering maybe a dozen, are in the Cairo Museum, the Metropolitan in New York, the British Museum, and the Louvre. This discovery is an important contribution to the history of Egyptian art and funerary culture. Neb joins a small group of illustrious 17th dynasty figures from around 1600 BCE, who can cast some light on the royal family and the elite in a little-known but very exciting time in Egyptian history, when Thebes went from a provincial capital to the capital of the kingdom, and eventually the capital of the empire. Shortly before the end of the excavation campaign, the Mudir decides to take a last look at the hold Ibrahim had discovered the week before. There is no science without curiosity, and there is no campaign without a last surprise. We are at the bottom of one of the burial shafts we excavated this year. It goes down around 6 meters, and there are 2 chambers at the bottom. Now we're going into the east chamber, which is about 2.5 meters deep and 2 meters wide. But there's a hole in the right-hand wall, so we're going into the hole to see what we find. It isn't a burial chamber as we thought. We thought this chamber would be connected to another chamber of another shaft. This is a gigantic gallery, very well carved and enormous. It's nearly 2 meters high and stretches in both directions. And it's completely full of human remains on top, linen and ceramic vessels. There are perhaps 100 pottery pieces on the surface, all in pretty good condition, some little plates. And there might be nearly 100 bodies.
Está la cámara súper bien tallada.
The chamber is extremely well made, with mortar on all the walls,
Mucha caña,
a lot of canes,
cañas, sogas,
ropes,
y a la derecha se abre.
and to the right the passageway continues
El
downwards.
pasadizo hacia abajo. Esto se
This
pone bien.
looks good. I can't believe it.
Aquí ya estamos bastante
Now
abajo,
we're
debemos
quite far
estar
down. We must be about 10 meters underground.
a 10 metros bajo tierra. Hay restos
There are
humanos,
human
hay
remains,
cerámica,
there are ceramics,
pero sobre todo
but
lo
what
que
really
llama la
gets my
atención son
attention are
los
the
grandes
large blocks
de
of
piedra.
stone.
Y desde luego, como digo, aquí tenemos 10 años por delante
Surely
de
we're looking at 10 years of excavation and research.
excavación y de investigación. Ahora sí que
It's
queda
clear
claro
now
que
that this gallery belongs to an
esta galería
11th dynasty
pertenece a
tomb,
una
which was probably
tumba de la
reused in the
dinastía
17th dynasty.
que ha sido probablemente reutilizada en la dinastía
And that's
17
why all the pottery
y
we
por
see
eso la
on the
cerámica que vemos
surface
en superficie
is 17th
es toda
dynasty
de la dinastía
or
17 o
early
principios de la
18th
18.
dynasty.
It's good. مبروك عليك حبيبي. The best team, inshallah, in all Egypt.
The Kiftawi and the Spanish.
Yes.
best team, eh?
Yes.
El proyecto Djehuty, tras 13 años de...
The Djehuty project, after 13 years of excavation, research and restoration, in its way is giving Djehuty back his name. It is giving him back his memory, and with it what he most desired, immortality. Of course, we are doing it in a way he could never have imagined. But I think if he was to climb out of his burial shaft and join us in his chapel, next to his statue and his parents' statues, well, he'd be very surprised. But I think he would be proud and pleased with our work. Hail to thee who emerges from the primordial waters, whose light floods the two lands like gold. Amun, Lord of the gods, Lord of the heavens and Lord of the earth, Lord of the waters and Lord of all that is, who created the plants and all that exists, who grants the breath of life to those that worship him, and who grants everlasting life to those who are faithful to him. Keep the kindly official Djehuty in health, and let him continue to exist.
مديرنا اسبانيا ويا اسبانيا اسبانيا يا اسبانيا شوي على النبي صلي على النبي